You all know the drill. You're online and a message appears from a name you don't recognise. They say they're someone from your bank or your network provider. There's something wrong with your account and they need to check some details with you. You might ignore the message, cross it off and go on with your day. But then again, you might get worried and reply. And before you know it, you've given this stranger access to your entire life savings. Soon you'll be telling people how quickly you can fall prey to a thieving, scheming scammer. We all know that story. But let me ask you this. Whose fingers are writing you that message? Who are these scammers, these con men who are ruining lives? They're scammers, yes. But what if that's just the start of the story? Because a lot of these people are also enslaved. Online scamming is $1 billion industry, but the people doing the scamming are often victims themselves, trafficked and enslaved by criminal gangs. This is one of the most horrific, underreported stories that I've ever come across. The scale of it is almost impossible to grasp, and it's on the rise. But who are the masterminds behind these operations? How complicit can you be in a scam that you've committed when you've got a gun held against your head? This is True Crime Reports, a global crime show from Al Jazeera. Today, slave scammers. It's September 2020, and we're in Cambodia. Lu Xiangru is 32, and he's just moved here from China. He used to work in finance, but he's always dreamed of running his own business. So he's moved to Phnom Penh with his family. A friend of his from back home has set up a restaurant, and he's offered Lu the chance to come and learn the ropes. Here's Lu speaking to Al Jazeera's investigative documentary show 101 East in 2022.
工资也不高，也没多少积蓄，然后就想着出来闯一闯。
Things are going pretty well. Lu and his wife have a 2-year-old son at home, and Lu's excited for what the future holds. In 2021, though, COVID hits Cambodia hard, and Lu's friend is forced to close down the restaurant. Lu is left jobless. Nobody's hiring, and he can't afford to fly his family back home to China. They're stranded. As the months drag on, and with a family to pay for, he's getting desperate. So, when a former customer from the restaurant approaches one day and tells him about a job, Lu's ears prick up.
就给别人看看市场，然后看看票就可以了，就这样。然后每个月1万多吧。
It seems too good to be true. The pay is amazing. $1,500 a month. That's 10 times the average salary in Cambodia.
然后到时候2个月左右就可以回国了。
So he takes the job, thinking it's worth being away from his family for a couple of months if it means they can go home. He's taken to a city called Sihanoukville, about a 2.5-hour drive southwest of Phnom Penh. It's on the coast and was once a quaint seaside town. But after floods of Chinese investment, it's now packed with casinos and hotels, and tourists who flocked here for the gambling scene. And when Lu arrives at his new workplace, he quickly realises something's not right. The building he's been taken to, it's a compound, a collection of tall, square, white buildings surrounded by a wasteland. As he looks around, he notices high fences surrounding the compound, topped with barbed wire. The place is crawling with security guards.
这个园区规模还是很大的，然后大概有2-3千人左右，里面他都不给出去的，而且1楼都不给去，他只能够在楼上，里面也很危险也。
He realises he's made a terrible mistake in coming here. He tells them he's not up for it He wants to leave, but he can't. Lou's told he now works for them, and his new job is as a scammer. He must extort money from people, and that money will line the pockets of his new employers. Besides, they go on, he's in debt. The person who offered him the job has sold him to the farm for $12,000. He can only leave once he's paid it back in full. But this is an eye-watering amount of money that Lou simply doesn't have. He doesn't know it yet, but this town Lou's now in, Sihanoukville, is the epicenter of a complex, international and very secretive criminal operation. Scammer slaves, people who are trafficked by gangs and forced to extort money from people all around the world. It's a double whammy of victimhood. The conditions they're kept in are awful. Working hours are long, often 7 days a week, and they're given unreal targets. Things like having to find and scam a certain number of people each day or extort a certain amount of money each week. Passports are often taken off them on arrival. There's no hope of escape. Lou is literally trapped.
My name's Marianne Jolly. I'm a reporter with Al Jazeera's 101 East program.
Marianne is the person who reported Lou's story for the very first time.
Once you know what a scam compound looks like, you can see them everywhere, particularly in somewhere like Sihanoukville. I mean, why else would they have massive bars on balconies?
Marianne says the types of scams people like Lou are being forced into are almost endless.
They were forced to carry out all sorts of scams, like from shopping scams to online gambling scams to cryptocurrency scams to dating, sex scams, computer game scams.
One victim who managed to escape said he'd been told to create fake online profiles and pretend to be a beautiful young woman. His job was to lure in rich old men over months and months, known in the industry as fattening the pig, and then gently, ever so sweetly, suggest that they invest in cryptocurrency. Marianne says cryptocurrency cons are particularly prevalent because there's barely any regulation.
A lot of them are run through legitimate sites, but then the scam company actually has a site that mirrors that legitimate site, and they get the victims to upload both, and then that's how they manipulate where they transfer the money to and so forth.
It's not clear exactly what sort of scheme Lou now finds himself wrapped up in, but it's not something he wants to be a part of. His first night passes. When he wakes up, he decides to take matters into his own hands. He emails the Chinese embassy, explaining what's happened. They reply, but tell him to call the local police. He does.
那个警察就问我要各种资料啊，就是哪一个宿舍的，然后照片啊，然后护照啊什么之类的，就是问我要这些资料。我还以为他马上要过来救了，等了一天了。
While he waits, he logs onto Facebook and sends messages to Sihanoukville's governor. But no one comes. And then things go from bad to worse.
结果等来的是物业，他们已经知道我在报警了，那个时候被发现了。
In these places, if you cause trouble, you're out. And the simplest way for the company to deal with you is to sell you on. So that's what they do.
然后他就说，因为你报警，然后警察那边我们需要打点，至少要花$4000左右，然后打点警察局那边，然后这个钱你要你自己付，算在你的赔付里面。然后他就最后以$16,700的价格，然后把我卖到第二家公司去了。
He's forced into a car and driven to a different compound. And this is where Lou sees the things he will never be able to forget.
因为在那天我看到一个人，然后就是被打得特别的惨的那种，浑身都是伤。
The stories that have come out of these places are harrowing. There are reports and videos of brutal beatings and people being electrocuted. Stories of being hit with a belt or a computer keyboard, or being locked in a dark room as punishment for missing your targets, or being starved. One man even threw himself out of a window trying to escape. Lou's horrified. And just hours after seeing that man being beaten up, he finds him hanging by his neck.
就是感觉特别的害怕，也是很担心，然后被他们会这样的折磨我自己也很害怕在里面。
With the walls closing in around him, Lou considers his options and wonders if he too should jump. Lou's story is anything but rare. He's one of the only victims to tell his story publicly under his real name. But there are hundreds of thousands more hidden behind a veil of terror and secrecy. It's called forced criminality, and it's been going on in places like Cambodia for at least a decade. But it's still chronically underreported. The first comprehensive report into it only came out in the summer of 2023 from the United Nations. It shows that Southeast Asia is a hotspot for scamming and trafficking operations like the one Lou gets caught up in. It estimates that there are currently 100,000 victims trapped in scam farms in Cambodia, 120,000 in Myanmar, and more in places like Laos and the Philippines. Country borders in Southeast Asia are long and mountainous, which makes them difficult to regulate. So keeping an eye on who's being trafficked in and out is complicated. And the victims aren't who you'd necessarily expect. Here's Marianne.
They weren't your normal trafficking well, not what people understand as being the cliched trafficking victim. One was aspiring to be a golf coach, quite well educated.
A lot of the victims are multilingual, and most of them are men. But every now and then, you do hear about young women too.
Another young woman, she was only 16, worked in a hot pot restaurant in a small village in China, and suddenly thought that she was going to be able to be, a secretary in a typing pool, which she thought was a massive step up.
Human trafficking fueled fraud is big money. Organised crime rings are raking in nearly $3 trillion a year. That's almost the same as France's entire economy. One victim, who was freed after paying his captors a ransom of several $1,000s, says the syndicate he was working for would extort nearly $140,000 a day from people like you and me. And that was on a slow day. We left Lou in Sihanoukville, trapped in a casino on the Cambodian coast. We'll come back to him in a bit, but first let me tell you another story. It's the 6th of February, 2022, and we're in Malaysia. It's the birthday of a woman called Yang Fei Pin. She and her husband, Goy Chi Kong, had been looking forward to celebrating as a family. But instead, they're worried. They have a son, and he's been away travelling for the last few weeks. He promised he'd be back in time for his mum's birthday, but they haven't heard from him. It's very unlike him. Their son, 23-year-old Goy Jun Fang, is a trainee teacher, and they last saw him about 3 weeks ago when he said goodbye before leaving for Bangkok. He was very excited because he was on his way to meet his new girlfriend, who he'd met online. But when 3 weeks later, they're celebrating Yang Fei Pin's birthday alone, they know something's wrong and register him missing with the Malaysian police. They won't hear from him for another 2 months, when suddenly he rings them at home. He's ill, he says, and he needs them to send money for treatment, nearly $18,000. But his voice sounds weird. His parents are certain he's being threatened. That will be the last time Goi Chi Kung and Yang Fei Pin will ever hear their son's voice. After that, he vanishes. Then, about 6 weeks later, their phone rings. Their son has been found. He's in a hospital in a small town in Thailand. He's dead. In a state of shock, his parents travel to Thailand for the funeral. It's a Thursday. They cremate him in a simple white casket along with a hoodie of his and his favourite backpack. There's a photo of them from that day, standing close, face masks on. Their other 2 children, a sister and a brother, watch over a live stream. Their hearts are broken. Nobody knows the exact details of what happened to Goi Jianfeng between the 19th of January 2022, when he waved goodbye to his parents to fly to Bangkok, and the 11th of May, when he died alone in a remote Thai hospital. But officials believe that his death is one of the first that can be formally tracked back to Chinese gangs. This is what has been found out. Having arrived in Bangkok, he'd been trafficked to Myanmar and taken to a scam farm near the Thai border. It's 20 blocks of buildings. Each block has 52 rooms with up to 8 people per room. Here, Goi is put to work. We're not sure what exactly, but it's 4 companies who lead online scams. Goi makes that last cryptic call to his parents on March 31st, 2022, asking for nearly $18,000. They thought he was being threatened. Just a few weeks later, reports say he's beaten up for apparently faking an illness. A stranger will admit him to hospital just over the border in Thailand, unable to speak, with a fake name and passport. He's in a critical condition with internal bleeding, and he'll die not long after. His death certificate will say he suffered from a rare untreated disease which attacked his immune system. But Malaysian officials and those close to the case believe he'd been beaten.
So, who's responsible? For Al Jazeera's Marianne Jolly, this is all part of a big operation.
I mean, the network that is behind these scam operations is massive. So it's not just a few kingpins, it's a massive network. When we were there, obviously a lot of it is to do with Chinese criminal networks coming to Cambodia, and finding exactly who's at the top of the tree is, I think there's numerous people and probably hundreds of people.
As more and more stories of horrific abuse are trickling out into the world, fingers are starting to point at the governments of the countries where this is happening. The Cambodian government in particular.
I mean, obviously with Cambodia, it's a highly corrupt country. There is no rule of law. The police are corrupt. For me, it had tipped over into becoming a criminal state. There's no arrests, nothing. It's unbelievable.
And more than that, these compounds operate with astonishing impunity, says Marianne. A lot of them are located in places known as special economic zones, which is basically an area with special tax breaks to encourage local business.
But they've taken it even further, and they sort of have their own authority within that special economic zone. So the local police aren't allowed to go in and do their job within that zone. They have to get permission from the special economic zone to go in there. So it gives another level of protection for the scam compound. In fact, one of the experts that we spoke to described them as special criminal zones, not special economic zones. And it's a good label for them.
We reached out to the Cambodian government for comment. They didn't reply. In response to the UN's 2023 report, which estimated there have been at least 100,000 enslaved scammers operating within their borders, Cambodian government officials have said they find it difficult to accept and have demanded more evidence. Attention has also been turning towards the tech companies, the Metas, Apples, and Googles of the world, because, after all, none of this could happen without them. Facebook and WhatsApp are favourite playgrounds of these gangs, the place where they make first contact with their victims. And some of the fake jobs that are offered, the lure that sucks them in, are backed up by a legitimate-looking app that can be downloaded from the Apple Store or Google Play.
I don't know how complicit they are, but they should be policing it in some way to try and stop it. Maybe in the beginning they were caught by surprise, as everybody was, but really it's incredibly important globally that they crack down on these advertisements.
Meta has made some attempts to educate its users. In 2022, they ran a short campaign in Cambodia called Let's Talk About Online Scams. But in its report, the United Nations says that's not enough. It calls for tech companies to acknowledge their role in these scams. We reached out to Meta, Google, and Apple for comment. Apple said that apps that attempt to scam users are removed from the App Store, and that from 2020 to 2023, they stopped over $7 billion in fraudulent transactions. Google and Meta didn't reply. There have been some small victories. In March 2023, 3 men involved in an intricate trafficking ring were convicted. They'd been operating from Batam City, Indonesia's third largest city. They received sentences of between 3 and 4 years, and astonishingly, were some of the country's first convictions for human trafficking-fueled scamming. And just a few months later, an epic rescue mission took place in the Philippines. Police staged a nighttime raid of a suspected scam farm in the capital, Manila. They stormed 7 buildings and found an astonishing 2,700 people inside. They rescued them all. A success story, yes, but the horror may not end there. Many of them will have faced criminal charges back in their home countries for the scams they did. In Thailand, it's been estimated that as many as 70% of enslaved Thais who've returned home have been prosecuted. And so we return to the 2 victims of this particular story. Lu Xiangru, the aspiring Chinese businessman trafficked to Sihanoukville in Cambodia, and Goi Jianfeng, the Malaysian trainee teacher trafficked to Myanmar. Lu's story has a happy ending. After 9 days and having been sold on to 3 different scam farms, he finally managed to get through to the authorities. Sihanoukville's governor replied to his desperate pleas for help, and within 24 hours, the police arrived. Now he's back in Phnom Penh, reunited with his wife and son. He spends his days in a building on the outskirts of the city, volunteering for a charity that helps enslaved people like him escape. While Lu managed to break free, his ending is rare. NGOs are trying to raise awareness of the issue, but it's slippery, and tracking the people responsible is hard. Lu's phone is full of messages from victims who are still trapped inside, begging for his help. He gets about 10 messages a day. They send him photos of their injuries, and they tell him about the beatings they suffer. One man sends Lu a video and writes, "They use electric batons to electrocute me. The footage is harrowing." Goi Jianfeng was not as lucky as Lu. Since his death, his parents have been appealing to the government to rescue other victims, like their son, who are trapped in Myanmar and Cambodia. In an interview with the South China Morning Post, his dad speaks directly to the world. No matter the offers online of meeting friends, boys or girls, or high-paying jobs, please don't be cheated by them, he says. These syndicates will use any method to lure you into this hell on earth. This was True Crime Reports, a global crime series from Al Jazeera.